Have you ever wondered why so many health conditions disproportionately affect Black communities today? High blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, and diet-related illness? The answer doesn't begin in modern grocery stores or lifestyle choices. It begins in slavery. Follow if you've never heard this story. What enslaved Africans were fed in the 1800s was not accidental. It was engineered. It was controlled. And its effects did not end with emancipation. Food was not nourishment. Food was a weapon. This is the story of the 19th century slave diet and how survival itself became resistance. Hunger as policy, not circumstance. Booker T. Washington once wrote, "Not much religion can exist in a one-room log cabin or on an empty stomach." Those words were not poetic exaggeration. They were lived experience. Washington was born enslaved on April 5, 1856, on the Burroughs Plantation in Franklin County, Virginia. By 1861, enslaved people made up nearly 80% of the plantation's total property value. In his autobiographical works, Up from Slavery and the Story of My Life and Work, Washington didn't just describe bondage, he described chronic hunger. Hunger was not a side effect of slavery. It was part of the system. Life inside the kitchen cabin. Washington described the cabin where he lived with his mother, brother, and sister. It was not only their home, it was also the plantation kitchen. There was no wooden floor, only packed dirt. In the center of the cabin was a deep pit in the earth, covered with boards, used to store sweet potatoes through the winter. Washington remembered this potato hole vividly because occasionally he was able to retrieve one, roast it, and eat. There was no stove. All cooking, for enslaved people and enslavers, was done over an open fireplace, using iron pots and skillets. Food preparation never stopped. Eating was rushed. Meals were fragmented. This was not domestic life. It was enforced labor, how enslaved families were fed. Washington described how enslaved families were fed like dumb animals get theirs. There were no shared meals, no table, no guaranteed portions. A piece of bread here, a scrap of meat there, a cup of milk one moment, some potatoes later. Sometimes several family members ate directly from the same pot. Others used tin plates balanced on their knees. Often they ate with their hands. Nutrition was never the goal. Sustainability for labor was the standard slave diet. Across much of the South, the standard enslaved ration consisted of cornmeal or cornbread, salted pork or fatback, occasional molasses, seasonal vegetables when available, fresh fruit was rare. Leafy greens were inconsistent. Protein was minimal and often preserved in salt. This diet was high in sodium, heavy in starch, low in nutrients, and lacking dietary diversity. It kept people alive. It did not keep them healthy. Breakfast with the animals. Washington recalled mornings when his mother left before dawn to begin cooking for the plantation. Breakfast was uncertain. When he couldn't find food, he went where the animals were fed. Boiled Indian corn prepared for cows and pigs became his meal. If he arrived too late, he scavenged kernels from the dirt near the troughs. This was not rare. Children often ate animal feed, not because they lacked understanding, but because hunger erases boundaries. Necessity, not theft. Washington remembered his mother cooking a chicken late at night and waking her children to eat. He never knew where the chicken came from. Some would call it theft. Washington refused that framing. He believed his mother was not stealing. She was surviving inside a system that criminalized hunger and denied sustenance. Slavery distorted morality. When survival required resistance, survival was labeled wrong. Food, inequality, on the same plantation. Washington once saw the young white mistresses on the plantation eating ginger cakes with visitors. To him, those cakes represented freedom itself. Later, during the Civil War, food shortages affected plantation owners far more than enslaved people. Why? Because enslaved people had never eaten well to begin with. Their bodies were already conditioned to scarcity. What archaeology confirms. Modern archaeology confirms these accounts. Excavations across Virginia and the South reveal pig and cow remains as primary meat sources, evidence of hunting, deer, squirrel, rabbit, raccoon, opossum, fishing tools, hooks, weights, oyster shells, foraged foods, berries, walnuts, grapes, hickory nuts. Some sites even show access to firearms, suggesting limited autonomy for hunting. These foods were not provided. They were found, grown, hunted, or taken. Survival required ingenuity. Resistance through foodways. One-pot stews became central to enslaved cooking. Meat, vegetables, and broth simmered together to stretch portions. This method reflected West African culinary traditions, where stewed dishes were common long before European contact. Maize, rice, peanuts, yams, and beans, African staples, remained essential. Cooking preserved memory. Cooking preserved culture. Cooking was resistance. The potato hole as quiet defiance. The root cellar, or potato hole, was more than food storage. Some archaeologists believe it reflected African traditions of storing valuables underground. Others link it to Igbo practices in southeastern Nigeria, where goods were stored beneath homes. Between 40% and 60% of Africans brought to Virginia were Igbo. When plantation owners recognized this as a form of autonomy, some raised cabins off the ground to prevent it. Even food storage became contested ground. The health consequences. The enslaved diet, high salt, low fiber, minimal nutrients, had lasting effects. High blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, kidney disease. These are not genetic failures. They are historical outcomes. Bodies adapted to extreme scarcity were later flooded with cheap processed foods after emancipation. Without healthcare, education, or resources, the system changed names. The damage continued. Reframing Black Health. In the early 1900s, sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois studied black health outcomes. He concluded that higher mortality rates were caused by conditions of life, not race. In 1906, health professionals agreed, stating there was no scientific basis for assuming black physical inferiority. The issue was environment, Booker T. Washington, and health reform. By 1913, black communities organized sanitation campaigns through the Negro Organization Society. Booker T. Washington recognized poor health as an obstacle to economic progress. He called for Health Improvement Week, which evolved into National Negro Health Week, celebrated annually for over 35 years. This was one of the earliest black-led public health movements in American history. Why this history matters now. The 19th century slave diet shaped modern food deserts, healthcare access, diet-related illness. Understanding this history reframes health, not as personal failure, but as inherited circumstance. You cannot heal what you refuse to understand. Slavery did not only control labor, it controlled nutrition, it controlled health, it controlled survival. And yet, within those limits, enslaved Africans preserved culture, resisted quietly, and laid foundations for recovery. History is not just memory, it is instruction. Subscribe here to uncover more hidden black stories. Comment if you'd like to hear more about black health history. We don't glorify injustice. We reveal truth, so history can't repeat itself.